Hi, my name is Matthew Batnick, and I have anaphylactic food allergies to all dairy, beef, and pork. When I was 2 months old, I was diagnosed with allergies after adversely reacting to a milk formula. Fortunately, doctors were able to recognize this and quickly implemented treatments to help save my life, but my story isn't as unique as you might think. There are actually 17 million Americans that currently suffer with food allergies in America, which are defined as the IgE-mediated reaction to the antigens in common foods, most commonly dairy, eggs, peanuts, tree nuts, fish, shellfish, and soy. Immunoglobulin E, or IgE, is a protein that is found in the human blood plasma that acts as an antibody and activates mast cells, causing an anaphylactic reaction. When the mast cells are activated, they release histamines into the bloodstream, causing the development of hives, constriction of airways and blood vessels, and various other signs and symptoms. One form of treatment that's previously been attempted to prevent or cure food allergies is food challenges or oral immunotherapy. Oral immunotherapy is intended to desensitize patients by introducing small amounts of a particular allergen over regular intervals, thus allowing them to develop a resistance to the allergen. However, oral immunotherapy is limited by the high rate of adverse events like hives, rashes, swelling, or even anaphylaxis. Thus, as its success is overwhelmingly erratic, the only current validated method of treatment is the complete identification and elimination of the food from one's diet. However, people have been trying to find alternative forms of treatment. And ironically, the most prevalent and accepted form of non-traditional treatment is traditional Chinese medicine, or TCM. One of the main components of complementary alternative medicine in the United States, traditional Chinese medicine serves as an alternative to drugs and prescription medications for patients. And the most effective form of TCM is known as Food Allergy Herbal Formula 2, or FAF2, which is a dried aqueous extract that consists of 9 different herbs from China that has been seen to be effective in inhibiting IgE production in a murine model of peanut allergy. However, the individual efficacy of the herbs and compounds within the formula has yet to be discovered. I found this proposition very interesting and contacted a lab that specializes in this particular field. I was fortunate enough to be accepted into the lab where I worked over the summer and conducted a study on 2 specific herbs that have gained traction recently for their ability to potentially inhibit IgE production. Those herbs being Hetsy, or Terminalia trebula, and Hoopoe, or Magnolia officinalis. Hetsy gained traction after a water-soluble fraction showed the inhibition of systemic and anaphylactic and antihistamine effect, while Hoopoe, the dried bark extract of Magnolia officinalis, is found in over 200 different types of Chinese formulae, and its main compounds, magnolol and hinokiol, have also been shown to be effective in inhibiting IgE production in a murine model of peanut allergy. The purpose of my study was to test the efficacy that these 2 herbs would have in inhibiting IgE production in a human U266B cell line. And the reason I targeted B cells is because they are generally considered to be the main producers of IgE. And based on previous studies, I hypothesized that both herbs would be effective in inhibiting IgE production in this human cell line. When I got to the lab, I first needed to measure various concentrations of my test herbs. I measured about 20 milligrams of both Hetsy and Hoopoe, which I dissolved in phosphate buffered saline, or PBS, to make 50 milligram per milliliter solutions. These were my stock concentrations. I then needed to measure 1,500, 250, 125, and 62.5 microliters of medium into each well of my 24 well plate that I was using for experimentation. This is part of my serial dilution. And when performing a serial dilution, the first concentration is always equal to double the volume. And since the volume of each of the wells in the plate was 500 microliters, you always want to add a little bit extra in case of pipetting error. Thus, the first well was 1,200 microliters, and the remaining ones were 600. And as 1,200 being the concentration of the first well, divided by my stock concentration of 50 equals 24, I added 24 microliters of volume to the first well on the plate to make my 1,000 microgram per milliliter solution. I repeated this process for the remaining solution concentration values. I then needed to place 500 microliters of medium into each well of the plate and put it in an incubator before harvesting 6 days later. They were placed into the incubator at 37 degrees Celsius under 5% CO2. And after the 6 days, I sprayed the 24 well plate with 70% ethanol for sanitization. I then collected the cells and the previously used medium from 6 days prior, and I pipetted them into new Eppendorf tubes, thus creating a new mixture. I then took 50 microliters of this mixture and placed it onto a hemocytometer, which I mixed with 50 microliters of trypan blue stain to prepare for my viability test to test the number of alive and dead cells found within each of the mixtures. So I then placed this onto a hemocytometer, placed it under the microscope, and tallied the number of alive and dead cells. And I took the remaining mixture that I hadn't used, and I placed those into new Eppendorf tubes and centrifuge at 10 minutes at 1250 rotations per minute before collecting the supernatant, which is in essence the liquid that I needed in order to conduct the last part of my study, the enzyme-linked immunosorbulent assay, better known as an ELISA. For my ELISA, I first needed to add 100 microliters of the supernatant to each well in my new 96 well plate before overnight incubation, and then over the course of the next full day, and after the additions of various compounds and proteins, including Mabtec 107, Mabtec 182 biotin, and streptavidin HRP, and after several incubation periods, I was able to test the optical density value of each of the wells in the plate. The optical density value would show how much IgE concentration was present in each well, which I compared to the known values in the well being those of the control groups. As my viability test was successful, with percentages of alive cells ranging anywhere from 69 to 79%, my study was immediately validated because any of the IgE that would be inhibited in the cells would be due to the treatment rather than to cell apoptosis. And although Hoopoe was not effective in inhibiting IgE production, with IgE concentrations being very similar to those in control groups, Hoopoe being represented by the purple, the control by the blue, and Hetzi by the green, Hetzi was incredibly effective at inhibiting IgE productions, specifically at high concentrations. For the most part, at Hetzi's highest concentration of 500 milliliters, it inhibited IgE production over 5 times as much as in 250 microliters. Thus, its success is truly dependent on the higher concentration that it would be at, and it can really represent the necessity for supplementation if it can continuously inhibit IgE production. However, further study is clearly required. What are the active molecules that mediate a favorable immunomodulatory effect and thus IgE suppression? That is the real question. I hope to figure that out this summer when I return to the lab and plan on performing a very similar procedure on Hetzi's most viable compounds, previously isolated by other studies as tannin, trebulin, and ascorbic acid enzyme being the 3 main components percentage-wise. And by performing a similar procedure, having a good viability test, and showing more IgE inhibition, my work could potentially signify the true necessity for supplementation of my individual Hetzi compounds. And this supplementation would greatly improve compliance for patients if they had to take fewer daily supplements. And if they could couple these daily supplements with the oral immunotherapy, their chances of any adverse events in the oral immunotherapy would be reduced, and thus their ability to develop a resistance to the allergen and thus reduce or completely eliminate their food allergy would theoretically soar. I look forward to developing a protocol that could help millions of food allergy sufferers and families, including my own. Thank you.